Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another in the ISKI Certification Day sessions. My name is Debbie Archer, and I'm going to be your host for this session. Just a few of the logistics, first of all, about how to ask questions. If you can pop your questions in comments or anything you'd like to say to Fran, then that'd be fantastic. We'll have a look at those at the end. If you do have a comment, please, if we don't have time to address it, then we'll come back to you later on. The session will be recorded, so hopefully people will be able to tune in and listen at a later time also. I'm not going to take up much of Fran's time, but hand over to him to give an introduction and to start his presentation. So sit back and enjoy. Over to you, Fran.
Great, thanks a lot, Debbie. And hello, everyone. I'm glad you could all join. I know in these times it's kind of difficult, you know. Hope you're all well and staying safe and all that. But yeah, there's a lot of these sessions taking place. So thanks a lot for taking the time to join in. And thanks a lot to Debbie and the ISKI crew for making this happen and inviting me along. And so yeah, just a little bit about me. Yeah, I've been working in Agile now for about 15 years. And, you know, prior to that, lots of different roles, developer, tester, all that kind of stuff. I had a testing services company. We grew for a number of years and were acquired by Sogeti, Capgemini. And so basically I work with a lot of different organizations. So I get to see a lot of different kind of contexts, you know, people using Scrum and Kanban and DevOps. And so, you know, through all of that, one of the things I've seen is that people are struggling I see a lot of times where people struggle with their agile testing. And one of the themes that underlies all of this, regardless of the context that I see the teams and organizations in, is that collaboration is a fundamental theme and a fundamental issue. You know, and in fact, you know, with Agile, that distinction between, you know, testing and development is kind of gone away, and you see a lot more kind of the integration of the two, obviously, and therefore for that to happen, you know, and to happen effectively, there has to be collaboration. So hence this talk, hence, you know, talking about optimizing your Agile testing through collaboration. So let me go to the presentation mode here now. So hopefully you can all see that. And so as I say, yeah, talking about collaboration, and I do see problems with this, for example, on the QA test side of things. I'm going to use QA and test interchangeably, although obviously QA is building it in more and so on. We could talk about that later if you want, but I'll be talking about both sides, building quality in and then doing the dynamic test side and so on, and trying to optimize that. But some of the problems I see are the separation between dev and QA. And I see separate teams, for example. The latest version 1 survey talked about how maybe 50%, it was around 50% of the respondents were saying that Dev and QA, you know, were still separate teams that hadn't integrated, which was surprising to me given the prevalence of Scrum. You know, about 70% of organizations are using Scrum or some hybrid for Agile. And that talks about a cross-functional team. But even when I see that, you know, when there are QA within the team, I often see them acting as a sub-team, a bit of a separation. So to me, it kind of points to quite a few, you know, collaboration issues between the two. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff I do, again, just to give a feel of where I'm coming from. I do the training side of things and certification training around ISTQB, obviously, and also supporting on the Scrum side. But a lot of what I do is customized, A lot of what I do is customized to particular clients' needs, you know, in terms of team-based training and so on, team primers. But I'm doing quite a bit, all this virtually now, and also quite a bit on the mentoring side virtually. So with that, it's nice. You can just dip in for a couple of hours, you know, with a team and sit in a backlog refinement and give them a bit of feedback, or work with a team to review their test approach, test cases, that type of thing. So that's kind of one of the nice aspects, I guess, of what's been happening with the virtual world, you know. So Agile, to me, it's all about collaboration. I run a non-profit conference here every year with called Agile Tour. We had Alistair Coburn, one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto here, and he distilled, you know, in his presentation, his keynote, he talked about he could distill Agile down to a single word, and that was collaboration. And I totally agree with that. And you see it in each of them in terms of each of the contexts, whether you're talking about Scrum or Kanban or DevOps, you know, collaboration is a huge element of the whole thing. And Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory, you know, written the book on Agile testing. again, they talk about whole team ownership of quality, which is very much about the collaboration aspects of the whole team. And so surveys also indicate that some of the biggest challenges to agile adoption and high performing teams and so on are people issues, resistance to change, and cultural aspects, culture being at odds with agile and so on, maybe having silos that you can't get out of, that kind of thing. So again, a lot about collaboration issues. So who should be collaborating? When Agile came along, it was really about development and test and the business collaborating together, and Agile being at the heart of this collaboration. So from the point of view of the business side, the traditional problem with software development was this lack of understanding between the business side and the product management side and the technical side in terms of speaking each other's language. And, requirements and specs would be handed over, and then the tech teams would go about interpreting that and developing some solution. And often it wasn't what was needed. It wasn't what was fit for purpose. It wasn't going to help a customer solve a challenge and a problem because of miscommunications there. So Agile brought the business together with the development teams. And so from a test and QA point of view, you're focusing on quality, fit for purpose, taking the customer view, the user view. This is invaluable. In terms of this close interaction. And in Scrum, it's the role of a PO to bring this interface, this customer representation into the team and into the test team, where the risks are, for example, from the point of view of biggest impact on your customer, so that we focus more of our tests in those areas. So it's kind of a pretty fundamental part of the whole agile approach, is that collaboration between the business. But I still see issues there in that collaboration. I see the latest version 1 survey again talked about over a third of the respondents had no dedicated product owner or insufficient availability of that business customer representation, which again, impacts significantly on one of the biggest benefits of agile, and also then leaves your QA, your testing, in a suboptimal kind of position, And similarly, dev QA, as I mentioned, kind of the silos, having separate dev and QA functions, So yeah, collaboration is key. But if there's challenges, around that collaboration, then it can have a big impact on the test side, where developers are not helping testers when there are bottlenecks, and when, the testing needs to be, the scope of that needs to be increased, or with automation and working together closely. If that's lacking, again, your testing is going to suffer. It's not going to be as effective as it could be. But then, of course, in terms of collaboration, we forgot about the ops guys. So DevOps, brings them into the fold in a collaborative fashion, and they get involved with the teams. They get involved in helping to identify requirements from an ops point of view, in terms of maybe the more technical, non-functional aspects that the system has to deal with, in terms of maybe scaling and so on, and stability, and also building in the requirements from an ops point of view, for example, around observability. So that they can be monitored in live better, and obviously environment provisioning and test environments. All of those kind of things are the great addition of that collaboration as well. But again, I see problems there. I was in a bank recently, and on the they did a DevOps initiative. They had a DevOps team, and I was working with a couple of the Scrum teams, and they were saying that they had some significant problems around their test environments, and I said, well, have you talked to the ops guys? And they said, yeah, we raised a ticket there a few weeks ago, so they were communicating through a ticketing system, whereas what you actually want is much more closer collaboration. So I suggested they have a chat with them, had a quick meeting, and it turns out the ops guys already had a solution to the problem they were having. So again, collaboration has to be worked on. It has to be kind of enacted to be effective. And of course, you collaborate with others as well. Collaboration between the delivery teams and management is obviously a big one in terms of management and product management, having these longer term views and commitments and roadmaps, and then maybe being stuck in a plan driven mode, and again trying to collaborate with teams who are working in a more empirical fashion. So trying to get that collaboration right so that it works well together. Of course, collaborating with other teams. If you're not just collaborating within your own team, but with other teams, other Scrum teams, for example, you may all be working on a single feature, and there may be then test dependencies across the teams, and you need to coordinate from that point of view as well. So all of these are, examples of the kind of the stakeholders. Could be regulatory people that have requirements that are going to impact on your testing as well. So collaborating with them, so what the requirements are from a regulatory perspective, or UX, and so on and so on. So, in terms of the culture, it kind of, if you've got a collaborative team culture, it means you don't have this scenario that's kind of depicted here in this diagram. It means that you don't have developers blaming testers, that type of thing. You're all in the same boat together. And so instead of this, we want kind of values and behaviors, that align with whole team thinking, and help build quality in. And everybody is responsible for quality in the team. Everybody does testing within the team. So they're the kind of behaviors you want. So, whole team responsibility for quality means, for example, that we share common goals. For example, there's a commitment to a level of quality that we feel is appropriate to achieve, whatever good enough is in our context. So it'll be very different in with an IT application internal compared to an embedded safety critical software system. So what are our goals? What's our commitment? What commitment to what level of quality do we need? And so, for example, based on those shared goals, everybody pitches in. So developers look after internal quality, for example. They're involved they do code reviews. They're involved in they obviously do unit testing and automation to help with the regression risk in Agile, running static analyzers, those kind of things. Whereas, the testers QA would obviously be more involved in the functional testing, at the story level, at the feature level, story interaction, workflows, that type of level. So more the external quality. So together, sharing these common goals, we all play our role type of thing, contributing. Testers may be contributing as Agile coaches as well. Test coaches, helping the developers in their testing, and then vice versa, the developers helping the testers with automation, and so on. So we want to leverage really the benefits of cross-functional teams, these different skill sets, the test side, the development side, technical side, and so on. And, we want that diversity, we want that, mix of opinions and perspectives. To lead to a richer solution to problems, because we were able to, rather than just have one particular viewpoint, one particular set of assumptions made, one particular set of biases introduced. So, we overcome these cognitive biases by these cross-functional teams, of which, test is obviously a part. And, the skill sets help us in that. So it's about collaboration. It's about building relationships, within the team, obviously, and across the teams, and with other stakeholders, as I mentioned. So this is very much about individuals and interactions, straight from the Agile Manifesto. It's very much about that. And, so what you want then as part of whole team ownership is a learning culture as well, where we're continuously improving, inspecting and adapting, and improving testing together, and improving quality together. These kind of areas. So when it comes to, I'm talking about the importance of collaboration, how it kind of how it manifests, and challenges may be associated with it. But how would I, as a tester on a team, actually go about trying to improve the level of collaboration, or maybe trying to address an issue that currently exists with the kind of level of collaboration, say, between me and others, or within a team. So I find, this really begins, to me, just with a person simply engaging informally with others, being proactive in terms of reaching out and interacting in whatever way you can in your context. So I find that people kind of like to talk about themselves. In general, it's a trait of humans, so ask them questions, ask them to talk about what they're doing. And in general, I find people are very forthcoming in that way. And that starts to, develop the engagement further. And asking questions, asking for help. Again, it's an ego thing. Again, I find mostly when you ask somebody for to help you, they're more than willing, because they're providing their knowledge and experience, and it's a positive thing for them as well to share that. And again, offering help potentially. As well, showing and the willingness there as well to engage, provide encouragement, support, sharing examples, for example, of test cases, scripts, stories, that type of thing. Maybe asking to observe an event, maybe in another team, see how they're doing their backlog refinements or their retros, or share examples of your test cases across teams. Look at each other's test approach. So again, you start to engage. So the broader your level of engagement as well, it's a win-win situation. The bigger picture you have within your organization, the more valuable you become to the organization, the more your career develops, so it's win-win all the way in terms of being proactive and making an effort, around developing these relationships. With COVID, things are obviously more difficult for teams. There obviously was distributed development. It's always been distributed development, but it's more pointed now. And there was a survey here in Ireland a few weeks ago that, the respondents, about 60% of them were feeling more stress, with the home working. Obviously, you've got kids, you've got all of that you're trying to juggle. And in general, it's more stressful, and also being disengaged. Around 50% or so were feeling disconnected from their teams. So we need to be much more proactive in trying to mitigate that kind of problem. And therefore, one of the ways to do that is to compensate by over communicating, to try and address the imbalance of not having people, for example, co-located or in the same office, to try and overcome that, and not by just more emails, because we all know that documentation is a poor form of communication. Agile is about individuals' interactions. It's about conversations. So we want real-time interpersonal communication, video conversation. And I also find that a lot of people, turn cameras off, in terms of meetings and so on. I can understand that if you don't want to be there in your PJs, first thing in the morning. But at the same time, the communication is much richer when you can observe, body language, facial expressions, people smiling, helps improve the rapport, instant messaging, all of that are better ways to communicate. So doing it more, I think, is a big thing we can do, maybe, to overcome some of these issues. And not to forget about the informal social interaction side of it, which has been cut off for many. So it's about being inventive in terms of how can we, do some of this online. Now, some of these I've mentioned here, like, having coffee chats where you take breaks, you know what I mean? You got to check in the morning, say how everybody's going, what's going on in your life, type of thing, bringing virtual food type of thing. Again, maybe the company buys pizzas for everybody and we have it together, celebrating virtually. Games, activities. I was one team recently, and they just had this little thing going whereby they had 20 different themes of songs around songs. So, for example, one of them might have been the first song you loved that you remember, so to speak, and then everybody put in theirs, and they'd vote on the best one, and there'd be a different theme the next day. So again, it's social interaction and trying to be inventive about ways to do this in a COVID-driven way of working at the moment, where you have that disconnection, everything's virtual. Some people, obviously something like, the cribs, showing them around your house, that mightn't go down too well in some contexts. So you just have to look at your culture, doing lunch in pairs, learning together, and as I say, I'm doing quite a lot of, all my training now is virtual. And at the start I thought, oh, this isn't going to go too well, but it's been great. Yeah, the feedback is great in terms of the interaction, breakout rooms for exercises, it works very well. And again, more of these kind of team-based activities are good to counteract, the isolation, the stress, and help build the teams. And again, doing it in a psychological safe environment. Now, that's important for anything, but it's also probably, again, more important when we're all working virtually, because it's easy, to start to feel when you're that kind of disconnected, that if anything is said, you start to feel that you're being maybe blamed. So, so this is all about, the belief that you won't be punished when you make mistakes, and therefore you're more likely to stick your neck out, and know that it's not going to be chopped off, So again, whatever way in your culture, you can help, ensure and advocate for this level of psychological safety, whether it's your mistake wall, so you actually celebrate the mistakes and learn from them, and we have it all visible and we talk about it in a positive way, providing encouragement, maybe even kind of qualitative safety surveys, with anonymity. So you can just say, at this point in time, we as a team in general, are feeling very safe in terms of, what we do, and being more forthcoming When I drop in on teams and there's silence from half the team, I start to worry. Is there an issue here with a bit of a blame culture or psychological safety? Sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's language based, but you want to ensure that you have this kind of situation where people feel safe to collaborate, and testers don't feel that they're second class citizens, for example. There isn't that kind of level of respect there, and they are less forthcoming in terms of raising concerns, which may be totally valid concerns and risks and so on, but they don't want to look bad, or they feel they'll be ridiculed. So you've got to be really careful. On the other way around, you don't want testers being critical and blaming developers. So you want to have that kind of safe environment. So how do we kind of go about, and maybe in a slightly more structured way rather than the informal way? How do we go about maybe improving the collaboration, and for testers and QA, obviously, is part of that? Well, we could talk about this in a second, like the team charter or Canvas, but you could also do, a value stream mapping, where you're looking at all of the activities, all the stakeholders, including test, are involved and engaged with, from the time you get a customer request to the time you kind of deploy a solution to it, and then talking together in collaboration around where the bottlenecks are, where there are problems, and then the constraints, and then together trying to figure out how you can address those constraints collaboratively. So again, just visualizing your way of working can also be quite a positive way to enable collaboration. And Kanban is obviously in that space. Its very first practice in Kanban is visualize what you do. So again, that can encourage collaboration. But here's another example of a team chart or a canvas, maybe to, try and set the context and agreement, get consensus for, the team's kind of way of working and its values and so on, or to reset it or recharge it at any point in time. So, it can help improve the collaboration potentially. It can, and obviously in the context of this talk, can help improve your agile testing based on some of the collaborative elements within this. Or indeed, it might expose a resistance to change or engagement that could occur, that could be present as well. So you want to tease these things out too. So everybody puts up their post-its virtually or whatever. And from a tester quality point of view, this will be an element of this team picture, and not necessarily just coming from testers, but coming from anybody within the team. So, the purpose is about, why do we exist as a team? What are we trying to achieve? And how quality might support that. What value do we put on quality? How important it is to it? And then in terms of goals, well, what is the level of quality we're trying to achieve, and how maybe then we start thinking about how we're going to try and achieve that. But very importantly, then the values, as I mentioned, that are quite important to set up the desired behaviors that are going to enable collaboration and that are going to enable better practices, higher performing teams, better solutions, better quality. Yeah, all of these things have an interplay between them. The roles and what people do. Everybody tests in the team, for example, and getting agreement on that, as opposed to developers saying, "Well, they're the testers; they do the testing." And then things that might come up in terms of, well, we want to learn a testing tool, or people want to learn some testing tools to get into automation. Or we might be strong as a team in domain area, but we might be weak on the NF4, so we may need to focus on improving testing of usability or performance or whatever. We highlighted maybe as a team that's something we need to focus on. And as a tester, for example, you need information and knowledge to test. So one of my expectations would be that I get information around risk, for example, around quality risk, product risk, to inform my testing, so I can focus my testing. I can't test everything. We can't test everything in the team. So where do we focus? We focus where the risks are highest. So discussing informally in backlog refinement and sprint planning sessions, the risks associated with our software, with our features, can help improve testing. So it might be articulating that as that's a need or expectation, within the team, is that we need to have this understanding of risk. And here I've got an example maybe from this as well. You identify things you might want to try. And I'll talk about pairing now in a second, but the word try there I wanted to emphasize. Jana Gregory came over to our SIG, our software testing interest group last year. She gave a workshop and a keynote at our annual conference. And this is one of the points she was making, and I thought it was a very practical one, is, resistance to change. People don't like change, so one of the ways to try and overcome that is to talk about that we will try something for a period of time. We'll try it for the next sprint. So people are much more amenable to that kind of approach and then trying something out in terms of a new way of testing, or whatever it is in terms of reviewing each other's tests, or pairing, whatever it is, rather than saying, okay, we have to make an ultimate decision here, So I think it's a very important kind of cultural kind of concept there to take on board, and it obviously relates to collaboration as well in terms of let's try things that will help us work better together. Yeah. So on the pairing side, pairing's always been a good idea. You've got two developers doing pair programming, you've got two testers pairing on an exploratory testing session, but also importantly here, you've got a dev and a tester pairing on a user story, for example, and talking together about what the risks are with this story, the developer sharing some of the technical risk, talking together about what testing the developer might do, how they could design it in such a way to make it more testable, and so on. So very closely working together, sharing knowledge, sharing skills, and it helps in the concept of T-shaped people. If you come across that, you've got your specialism, but you want to encourage broadening out your skills, becoming more general over time. So pairing is a way to kind of enable that kind of knowledge transfer as well. So the tester gets a bit more visibility on the technical aspects, and the developer gets more visibility on good testing practices and how to design good tests. So you get to know each other better. Mutual respect increases. So these kind of practices, general team-based practices like bug hunting and mobbing and so on, are also, of course, very useful in this sense too, as a practical way to engage people together as a team. So it's the we, it's not the I type of thing. And it's particularly important, I think, with the virtual world, new hires coming into teams. How do you adopt or bring people into your culture? And again, when you only have a few structured meetings a week, and I think pairing becomes even a more valuable activity, for people to get to know each other better and to get inducted into a way of working. So again, I think it's certainly worth considering more emphasis on pairing as we kind of move forward over the next few months in particular. So user stories is just something I want to highlight, because they are identified as a collaboration tool. They're very much a collaboration tool, people working together, so that we're in backlog refinement, we're discussing the requirements with the product owner. We're trying to identify what's required, but the point is they're inadequate to develop against, they're inadequate to test against. It's the conversation that's important here. It's the shared understanding that comes out of it. So we're helping to build quality in through that shared understanding between dev and QA and the business side, and prevent defects. They're the glue, they're the social object, the glue between the team. But it can be difficult to create good ones. So if you haven't come across INVEST, have a look at it from Bill Wake. It's an acronym for good stories are independent, they're negotiable, they have value, business value. We can estimate them to small and they're testable. So I want to emphasize the value and the small part, because I think they're quite important from the collaborative aspect. Valuable stories are vertical. They cut through your architecture and the various layers from your front end to your back end and so on. And it helps, therefore, keep a focus on value, the user perspective, compared to horizontal stories as a back end developer, I want type of thing. Straight away, you're into the technical side of it. You're effectively talking about tasks there. They're not user stories as such. Yeah. So this helps with more flexible QA dev collaboration on each story, because we're talking about it together for longer in the backlog refinement, because we're staying in terms of the functionality, what's required. And then when we get into sprint planning, we're talking together about what we can do jointly to implement this story from a development and test perspective. What are the testing tasks, for example, that we can take on together? What will the developer do? What will the tester do? And as such, compared to a technical story where maybe in a backlog refinement, you've already split it into technical stories as a horizontal, as a back-end developer. And straight away, there's going to be less engagement there. That, the test mightn't be familiar with the details, the technical aspects of that. So the conversation is stymied. Yeah. So staying with vertical valuable stories, I think, is a key benefit from the point of view of collaboration. And also small then, small stories have always been, large stories cause problems, basically. They don't get finished within the sprint. They start spilling over to the next sprint, and all of that gets very messy in terms of being able to forecast, and things don't get done, and you fudge your definition of done. Or, the story's big, it gets done within the sprint, but the testing is a phase at the end. And again, that gets squeezed. It's like the mini waterfall. All the problems of waterfall testing get squeezed. So again, your coverage reduces. You don't fix the bugs that you'd like to fix. Whereas small stories that you progress and complete all the way through the sprint. So after 2 or 3 days of the sprint, you've got a story or two done, the most important stories. It's motivating for a team to see that progress, real progress, rather than some technical parts of the work are done, but it hasn't come together. Product owner has no view on real progress here, So it gets more whole team thinking and collaboration to work together as a team to get these small stories completed, these valuable small stories completed. So, and from the point of view of Scrum, a lot of the events in Scrum are set up to encourage collaboration. Backlog refinement is about that shared understanding collectively together to build quality in. So I have an article coming out, a blog coming out of this that's going to be also published in Tech Beacon in a couple of weeks, and it's very much about the, it's titled 7 Ways That Poor Scrum Can Impact Quality. Yeah, so it touches on to, goes into detail a bit more of some of these items here. I see, for example, 3 Amigos being used, which is great. You've got a developer, tester, product owner coming together to do that refinement on stories and estimation. But if they're not going to subsequently involve the whole team in a refinement to really get the rest of the team up to that shared understanding, then you end up with a problem, because that collaboration has been inhibited, the shared understanding isn't there, and suboptimal solutions will result. And then in sprint planning, it's the whole team jointly designing the solution, identifying the tasks together. It's not breaking up into sub-teams, and what will I do in my bit? What will you do in your bit? Again, vertical stories help with this joint aspect to it, compared to the siloed view of the world. Yeah. So again, we talk about, what the risks are, what the test approaches be, how can it be made more testable? And as a daily Scrum, for example, us working together to see how the stories are going, how we as a team are moving towards the achievement of our goal as a team for that sprint, rather than, a siloed reporting in terms of what I did yesterday and what I'm going to do today. You want the team to synchronize and work together to help achieve their goal. So what's the expression? Follow the work, not the workers. Yeah. So what work is happening on the stories and how they're progressing to being done. And the retro, working together collaboratively to improve your test practices, for example. Look at your quality. Are you moving towards your quality goals? Doing experiments, trying things out, learning, adapting, inspecting and adapting as you go. Again, a key collaborative opportunity there between dev and QA and everybody within the team. And then the feedback at the review or demo, so that you keep your focus on the customer and quality and what's important from that customer perspective and the outcomes you want to achieve for that customer, to have happier customers and basically perform better as an organization. And the ongoing focus of QA is part of that. So just wrapping up then, just a few points or themes that kind of came through that then in terms of helping to improve the collaboration, to help optimize your testing. I want to emphasize the importance of vertical small stories, user stories, because when I see that they're horizontal, when I see that they're large, I see big impacts on the dev QA collaboration. And I think they really help if you try and keep the user story focus. And pairing, as I mentioned, a very good practice, and also particularly in the virtual world today, Dev QA pairing to help with that collaboration as a practice. The daily scrums, the we versus the I, we as a team, trying to progress the stories rather than just focusing on our individual tasks in our silos. So in general, looking at the informal side, team building aspects, the informal social side, again, helping, with that interaction. So we end up working better together and interacting better and performing better testing and delivering better quality as a result, compared to being isolated. Coaching as well, being aware of, let's say, the behaviors that are against the values and desired behaviors that you're looking for, that impact negatively in collaboration. So encouraging the positive ones and obviously discouraging the negative ones there. and the way in which Dev and QA interact, for example. Team charter might be an idea, the retrospectives, focusing on continuous improvement of quality and the overall test approach, and also looking at the collaboration itself and how that could be improved in general. Yeah. So hopefully I've convinced you of the importance of collaboration to help optimize your testing, to enhance your knowledge in the approach, and collectively end up with better quality then as a result of it. Hopefully you got some ideas and insights around all that. So yeah, thank you very much. And I think we may have time for a few questions.
Hi, Fran. Thank you so much, as always. Absolutely packed with insight, practical advice, and
Thank you.
good, solid stuff.
You're too nice, Debbie.
Thank you, Fran. You know that. One of the things I think you've already answered, somebody was saying with new hires in the context of what is happening at the moment with remote working, how would you recommend we make sure that they are brought into the culture? I think you touched on that. Is there anything you'd like to further elaborate?
Yeah, I think, the way they talk about teams, the forming, norming, storming, all that kind of stuff. I think when you bring new people into the team, you got to look back, as if you're restarting that particular process. It's great if you have a Scrum Master around, because they can kind of lead that charge, so to speak, in terms of bringing that person up to speed, in terms of the way of working, the practices, focusing on helping that person and encouraging them in the various kind of Scrum events, but then also in terms of ensuring that maybe they're mentored, within a team and brought up to speed, rather than just left there, in their home office trying to read documentation. So pairing, as I say, is a very useful way to do that. Yeah, and I think the team charter, things like that as well. Making sure they're aware and agree themselves and understand then what the values of the team are, and feedback on that person, to that person as well, or to those people, the new hires. So the virtual training, the mentoring, all that kind of stuff can help as well. Yeah, all the informal engagement stuff I talked about, ensuring that they're fully engaged in all of that. You know what I mean? They're part of that whole picture. But yeah, it's difficult. Me joining a team as a new hire, in a virtual world, very, very difficult. Obviously when restrictions ease a bit, get together, at least go for a walk together, so you get to physically see somebody if you can, if you're in the same location. Otherwise, you're kind of relying on being inventive as possible to get that person engaged with members of your team. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's so important. In any sort of business, actually, at the moment, keeping that engagement going is becoming more and more critical.
Yeah, exactly.
Good advice.
And from a people point of view, and from a stress and disconnection point of view, as that survey pointed to, it's definitely tougher. So we have to overcompensate for that disconnection.
Yeah, absolutely. Question for you here. You talked about the vertical small stories. What is small enough, and how would you define it?
Well, you come across a few different rules of thumb. One is somewhere a few days, I think, is the answer. I see rules of thumb like between 1 and 6 days. I see rules of thumb they shouldn't be, somewhere between a tenth and a quarter of a team velocity, that type of thing, in terms, say, of story point size and so on. So typically when people do story point estimation, which is a relative sizing of the stories, they typically use a range of 1 to 13. Using the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And every story that they want to estimate is relative to that reference set. So the trick is to have a reference set that's in the range for right-sized for you. 13 is about the biggest you want to handle. So therefore, if you estimate a new story and it's bigger than 13, then you're into epic land. And that's something that's going to have to be decomposed and sliced later on. So there is an element of maybe, trying it out at the start until you can agree on a reference set. And from then on, you're kind of in a reasonably a stable world in terms of saying what small is. Yeah. The bottom line is, if you're not getting it finished within a sprint, including all the testing and achieving your definition of done, then obviously they're too big. But even a story that doesn't get delivered until the last 2 days of the sprints, to me, is too big a story. You know what I mean? Particularly if you've got let's say the functional testing still to do. You want to have small stories prioritized on your team backlog, your sprint backlog. You're working as a team to focus on the most important ones, to get them done as early as possible in the sprint. So stories are being completed all the way through, rather than there's a big handover of all stories from dev to test at the end. So they have to be small to achieve that. And if they're not achieving that, maybe it's an indicator that your story's too big, and with all the problems that ensues.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a lovely answer. What do you think the role of management should be to support better collaboration?
Yeah, I think they have a lot of responsibility. We talk about a lot of talk about leadership in Agile. So they need to lead away from that point of view of collaboration and the behaviors and the values, and demonstrate it in their own walk the talk, so to speak. And emphasizing the importance of testing and quality, and the value that's put on quality. That kind of sets the scene, right from the start. If it isn't valued, if it's seen as a necessary evil and so on, then that's obviously going to affect things, But also, management are also, a bit more stuck, I find, in a plan-driven world. They have obviously the constraints of, talking to customers and when things are going to be delivered and so on, and other stakeholders. And they have product roadmaps that we have to plan for, and product management and so on. But we also have to realize that shouldn't be a fixed, rigid thing. In Agile, it's value focused, not plan driven. So there needs to be they need to collaborate with the teams who are trying to work in an empirical fashion, in a more iterative, incremental way, with feedback and adaptation. Inspect and adapt is a huge thing. So ensuring that they lead in that way in their terms of their own behavior is a starting point. But maybe practical things they can do is maybe help put the guidelines around testing, a test strategy as a guideline, lightweight type of thing. Organizational support, like getting rid of the silos and having cross-functional teams, those kind of organizational structural things. If you're using Scrum, that would be what you'd be doing. But even if you don't do that, having Kanban, where you get stakeholders together, working closely together as part of a kind of a value stream. Investing in infrastructure in terms of a test automation framework, stuff like that. So supporting the teams rather than letting every team figure it out themselves, but also investing in people, so reward team performance and encourage that collaboration rather than just sticking with individual performance in terms of, reward structures. And obviously when you hire people that are amenable to that collaborative activity. So if somebody doesn't demonstrate the ability to collaborate, maybe they're not the right person to join your team. So the soft skills, I think, take on a greater emphasis when you're trying on the HR side, to bring in people that'll support the teams. Again, the supporting the learning and development in Scrum and testing and all those areas as well. So encouraging communities of practice, there's just tons they can do. But being very aware of inspecting and adapting the Agile transformation. How's it going? What are the impediments right now to greater levels of agility in our organization, achieving the level of quality that we want to achieve, and looking at the people collaboration aspects as part of that potentially as well. And if things aren't working, doing something about it in an incremental, continuous way.
Thank you, and thank you for touching on the soft skills. I think they're really important. Good mention there. Earlier you mentioned that many teams have no product owner to collaborate with. What can organizations do in that situation?
Yeah, I think there's, if you have no product owner, you've been getting the requirements from somewhere, okay? Maybe it's just a product owner who doesn't have much availability. Okay, so maybe the obvious approach then is to try and maximize the effectiveness of whatever level of engagement you have. So there's maybe more prep done on the part of the team. So when they get together with the product owner, they're getting the most out of them. Okay, so that's obviously the first thing you do. Work with what you have and try and make the best of it in a sense. But obviously then you were getting your requirements in the absence of a PO or very limited. There's other places where you're getting your requirements. So it's about engaging and collaborating with those maybe in a better way to elicit requirements, whether they're coming from sales or marketing or regulatory or wherever you're actually, maybe getting that kind of information, developing those kind of relationships. In some cases, I've seen a proxy PO is needed. Let's say you might have product management in the States, but they're just not available to the team. So maybe there's a proxy product owner locally who spends more time making sure they're in sync with the product management and then representing that view to the team. It's not ideal. it's Chinese whispers, it can suffer from that, misinterpretations, but sometimes it's a way to overcome a constraint that is really kind of hurting the team. Just for the team to try and develop their own domain expertise as well, by engaging with those stakeholders. And testers could play a good role in that as well. They're not as embedded in the bowels of the code and the technicalities of it, and they're taking that customer view when they're doing their testing, that user view, and in that sense they're closer to the perspective of the product owner and so on. So testers often can be a kind of a catalyst, or it can be one of the champions, I guess, of that customer perspective and focus, and enhancing the domain knowledge within the team. But yeah, it's difficult, to address it. So you just try and work within the constraints that you have, to try and maximize your business and customer focus, whatever way you can in your context.
I think a lot of that relates to this question that I have here from somebody sorry, you're making me laugh, sorry. And that is, we've had a few false starts with this, Fran. How do we kind of take stock, step back, and then start again?
In terms of what? Agile or collaboration or testing or?
Agile. Just bear with me, just double check. Agile.
So yeah, false starts. Yeah, it's difficult. The question is, the first thing I try and figure out is why they didn't start. What was the problem? Do the root cause analysis on what the problem was, and why they didn't take off. Was it cultural? Is it people? Which it often is, and then we're into, all of those situations, ways in which you can try and overcome those resistance to change, so that people feel ownership of it, so that they don't fear it, so that they understand how it's going to affect them. All of those kind of soft aspects as well, that communication, why we're doing this, where we're thinking of going with this, and ensuring that it's a win-win for everybody, so that there's that kind of understanding that needs to be communicated, to the team and to the people. And then obviously if you can try it and demonstrate some success from it, obviously it's a good thing to do. And then you'd likely to get more buy-in from other people and from management and so on. It is important to get management commitment in the first place, obviously. But I think that's a key one in terms of practicing it. I think, something else in my mind there, I just forgotten it. There's just, there's a huge amount you can do. I think a key thing is to develop a deep understanding of Agile, the manifesto, and if you're using a framework like Scrum or Kanban, understand not just the mechanics of it, but the rationale for it. Why do we have a backlog refinement session? What's the objective of it? And in our context, what's that going to look like? It might be different than the textbook, right? Because of our situation, but can we still achieve the same objectives? So ensuring that you get the competency, either acquire it yourself individually or bring it in for whatever period of time you can, to ensure that understanding of the rationale and why you're doing things is there. And that way you're more likely to avoid the thing that I often see, which is poor implementation of Agile methods and frameworks, which then aren't effective. And you've got problems with testing or whatever it is. You don't invest in the automation, and you don't try unit level. You're still trying GUI level, and problem. And it's because of a lack of understanding, of how these things, what they're trying to achieve, and the interplay between them. So, part of it is developing that kind of competency around Agile in the first place. And so that's part of it. But I think a big thing is culture, and it repeatedly comes up in surveys. So you've got to try and figure out, in your culture, where are the barriers, and keep looking at those impediments and trying to address them, just as you might look at impediments to technical practices, if you know what I mean. You've got to look at the cultural side continuously as well, and look at behaviors and agree sets of values, like the charter thing I talked about, but maybe even doing that at a broader level, not just within the team level, at an organization level. What are our values? What's our vision? Where are we trying to get to? So that people understand the big picture. sometimes teams just see their own little bit of stories they're working on, and they don't see the big picture, and they don't see the outcomes that you want to achieve for your customers. Not just delivering feature after feature, but what's it going to help the customer do? And for teams and people to understand that and to see that if we can do rapid small changes and get that feedback and see that we're delivering those outcomes, or make quick changes so that we are able to deliver more value, that whole thing becomes more motivating, rather than staying maybe in a more traditional way of working.
Yeah, Fran, that is absolutely fantastic. We're out of time. A huge thank you from myself and everyone at ISKI, and a couple of thank yous here. Most appreciated.
No, thank you. Really good luck with it.
Yeah, see you soon, Fran.
Okay,
thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.